everybody, and welcome to another Real Rugby video this week. Today I'm picking my all-time greatest Springbok 15, and I know before I get into this video that I'm opening myself up to a lot of criticism, but hopefully also a lot of debate. I'd love to hear from you in terms of who you think the greatest Springboks were. It's the same format as all my previous videos. I will give you my opinion on who some of the greatest players were in each position, and ultimately pick my greatest Springbok Dream 15. But before we get going, I want to take this opportunity to thank the guys at Mark of Legend who decided to sponsor this video. I want to just give them a big shout out. Mark of Legend is a leather production company, and they produce the highest quality bespoke leather goods that you will find in South Africa. I can tell you firsthand that they only use the best full grain leather, and that their products are meticulously hand stitched to create products that will stand the test of time, both in style and durability. They have a range of designs available, and they can create custom designs to suit your specific needs, from travel bags, sports bags, handbags, wallets, and anything else that can be made from leather. They will create the perfect product for anyone. And just to prove that I'm a big loyal customer of Mark of Legend, I've got a Mark of Legend wallet that I've been using for the last couple of months, and I've got some compliments on this as well. Really, the quality of their products is amazing, so go and check them out. The links are in the description to all the social media and to the website. A big thank you to Mark of Legend for sponsoring this video. Go and support them, guys. They make fantastic products. Right, getting into the video, it's the same format as before, where for every single position I will give you a short list of names and tell you who I think some of the top players in each position were, and ultimately I'll pick one player in each position. Right, for fullbacks, fly-offs, scrum-offs, number 8s and hookers, I've got a short list of 5 players. And then for the wingers, centers, flanks, locks and props, I've got a short list of 10 players from which I will pick 2. So let's get into it. Looking at the fullbacks, a couple of notable mentions that didn't make the short list here is Gijsie Pienaar, Gerard Morkel, Gerry Brandt, Lionel Wilson and Roy Dryborough. My top 5 that I've picked in 5th position, I went with Johan Jennis. At number 4, I picked Frans Steyn because I think he played better rugby at fullback than he did at centre. At number 3, I had to include Percy Montgomery. I never used to be the biggest Percy fan, but you know, you have to give him credit for what he's achieved in the Springbok jersey. At number 2, which I think is going to be a little bit controversial, I went with Andre Joubert. And in top spot, and the greatest Springbok fullback in my opinion, is H.O. de Villiers. So just to give the rationale behind the selection, a lot of people I think would say Juba was the greatest Springbok, but if you look at his career, it was only really in 1995 and 1996 that he was the natural first choice for the Springboks in the fullback position. He made his debut all the way back in 1989, and for all the seasons that he played, it was either him or Theo van Rensburg or Hugh Edwards. You know, they sort of chopped and changed, and he never really cemented himself as the number 1 fullback in South Africa until Kitch became coach at the end of 1994. So throughout 95 and 96, he was the first choice, but it was only really 2 seasons. And as good as he was, I had to pick H.O. because H.O. is somebody that redefined the way that fullbacks played. He wasn't just the type of fullback that would catch the ball, kick it back to the opposition. He was the first counter-attacking fullback in South Africa. He was very, very quick. He could tear defenses to pieces. He could break the line, cut in between the centers, solid under the high ball, and again, his counter-attacking brilliance from the back was really, really good. So I'm going with H.O. I'd love to hear from you in the comments section. Debate me a little bit on this one, but I think H.O. de Villiers is the greatest Springbok fullback of all time. Looking at the wingers, some players that didn't make the short list, but who I think deserve a mention here is Brayton Paulse, Chester Williams, Henny van Zyl, J.P. Peterson, Louis Babro, and Pieter Rousseau. My top 10 that I've picked in 10th position, I went with Jannie Engelbrecht. At number 9, I picked Sid Nomus. At number 8, I went with James Small. At number 7, I picked Gerry Germeshuis. At number 6, I went with Bob Loubser. At number 5, I went with Tom van Vollenhoven. At number 4, I picked Gert Miller. In 3rd spot is Carl du Plessis. In 2nd spot, and the guy that I picked on the left wing, I had to go with Brian Abana. So a lot of people, I think, again, will debate me on whether I pick Carl du Plessis or Brian Abana, but 64 tries for the Springboks in a career over 12, 13 seasons, Brian Abana has to be in that position. If you look at the types of tries that he scored, he did a lot of stuff on the field that most players couldn't do. He was explosive. He was fantastic on defense. He was the kick and chase that worked so well with Freda Priya. He really exploited that as well, because he brought that skill to South Africa's attack. But his individual brilliance a lot of the times swung games in South Africa or in the Bulls or the Stormers' favour. So I had to pick Brian Abana. For me, he's the greatest left wing that this country has ever produced. And I would play him in tandem with Ray Moort on the right wing. So I think together they would be very, very destructive on the attack. Ray Moort, I think, is not just the greatest right wing that South Africa has produced, but potentially that the world has ever seen. You can put him in the same sort of conversation as guys as John Kerwin, David Campese. I think Ray Moort was right up there. He was a genetic freak, supremely fit, unbelievably powerful, but very agile for a big, powerful guy. And he didn't just run over players. He could beat them on the outside with pace as well. So that's my dream combination on the wings. Ray Moort and Brian Abana. I don't think you can beat that. That is a good combo. In the centres, a couple of guys that didn't make the shortlist include Frans Steyn, Jochie Jansen, Ryk van Schoor, and Wolf Rosenberg. In my top 10 and 10th position, I picked Michael du Plessis. At number 9, I went with Pierre Albertyn. At number 8, I picked Chol Lategan. At number 7, I went with Andre Snyman. At number 6, I picked Japie Krieger. At number 5, I went with John Gainsford. At number 4, I picked Jacques Fourie. At number 3, I picked Jean de Villiers, which means at number 2, I picked Manikis Roux. Now, Manikis, I'm picking at 12, although he didn't play inside centre. He played wing and outside centre mostly during his career, but I had to make space for him in this backline purely because he is one of the greatest attacking players that South Africa's ever seen, and he was fiery on defense and very, very aggressive. He was known for that. But I mean, just look at the try he scored against the Lions in '62. Very, very few players would have scored that try. He had blistering pace. He wasn't a big guy, but he could stand his man, head to head with any other players. So Manikis, for me, I'm picking him at 12, which is out of position, I admit, but I couldn't pick him on outside centre because that spot belongs to one player only, which is Danie Gerber, and it's a no contest. I don't think there's anybody on this list that even comes close. Gerber was the perfect rugby player. I've said this so many times, I sound like a stuck record, but just a brilliant runner with the ball, beautiful to watch on the field. That try that he scored against the Irish in 1981, as well as the try he scored against the Cavaliers in '86, are probably my two favorite tries of all time. He had everything. He's not just the greatest centre that South Africa has ever produced, but he's probably the greatest outside centre that the world has ever seen. So Danie Gerber and Manikis Roux, if I had to pick a more like classic inside-outside centre combination, maybe I could have looked at Jean de Villiers and Danie Gerber, but I went with Manikis and Danie in the midfield. Okay, going into fly-off, I think this is going to be a little bit of a debatable topic because there's a lot of Henry Honeyball fans on my channel, and I'm also a big fan of Henry Honeyball, but he didn't make the shortlist. Other players that I looked at were Handré Pollard, Jannie Barnard, Morné Steyn, and Tony Harris. All fantastic players, but my top 5 and 5th position, I picked Keith Oxley. At number 4, I went with Piet Visagie. At number 3, I picked Benny Osler. At number 2, I went with Hannes Brevis. And top spot, as always, for me, it's not debatable. It has to be Naas Botha, who I think was the complete fly-off. Now, I know he gets a lot of criticism, and you can debate me all day long. I don't care. Was Naas a defending fly-off? No, he wasn't. But no fly-off during the 70s or the 80s were. You didn't see De Vetras or Skalk Nordea or these guys tackle like Henry Honeyball did. So it's not the way the game was played. And Naas didn't bring value to a team defending. So for me, that is the most pointless argument against Naas because that wasn't his game. That he needed to play. He was a match winner that could kick with both feet, that would win games for sides that he played. And you think about that 1987 Currie Cup final, which he almost single-handedly won. The forwards just gave him the ball and he took care of the points. Winning the series for the Boks in 1980 by kicking a conversion from the touchline in the mud, in the rain, in Port Elizabeth, from the touchline. Nas just he was a big match winner, you know, and he had BMT that other players didn't have. And in the amateur days, you know, he played like a professional, and he approached rugby as a professional. And I don't care what anybody says, Nas is the greatest fly-off that South Africa's ever seen. So I'm sticking with him, although all the other fly-offs on the list that I mentioned were just as good and deserve a mention. They were all fantastic Springboks. Scrum off was another debatable one, which we'll get to, but notable mentions that didn't make the shortlist are Dirk de Vos, Divan Serfontein, Faf de Klerk, Piet Uys and Ruan Pienaar. In fifth position, I picked Fonnie de Toy. At number 4, I went with Dani Craven. At number 3, I picked David de Villiers. At number 2, I picked Freda Priya. And in top spot, as I've mentioned in another video, I had to pick Joost van der Westhuizen. So I don't necessarily compare Joost to Freda Priya. They were two different players or style of player. Freda Priya was probably the technically the better scrum off. Joost for me was a more complete rugby player, or just like a natural rugby player, who maybe didn't read the game as well as Free did, but you know, he had a lot of instinct that brought him the 38 tries that he scored on the field. So it's a tough one to pick, but if I look at that back line, I think Joost fits in with it quite nicely. Let Nas do the sort of, you know, the role of general on the field and put the team in the right position, and Joost can just, you know, feed them the ball and be that supportive player that made him great. So I'm going with Joost. I think he's not just the greatest Springbok scrum off, but also the greatest scrum off that has ever played the game. But that is just my opinion. Going into the forwards, so who's going to secure the ball for this potent back line? Number 8 is going to cause a lot of debate, I think, because some of the names that I've left out of my shortlist include Morné du Plessis, Gary Teichmann, Joe van der Kerk, Kleinkie Grobler, Klippie Skritzinger, Piers Spies, Tiaan Strauss, and Tommy Bedford. Because my top 5, in 5th position, I picked Bob Skinstad, which I think a lot of people are going to look at and say, how did I not pick Morné du Plessis or Gary Teichmann? But purely looking from like a player's capability and the skill that Bob had, when he was at the peak of his career, you know, he was just so dynamic. He was a brilliant rugby player. And I had to include him as one of my favorite players of all time. A wonderfully, naturally gifted rugby player who should have probably played 100 tests. You know, it's a shame that he didn't play more for South Africa. But really, when you look at when he was at the height of his career, I think Bob Skinstad, you know, deserves to be on this list of mine. At number 4, I picked Doug Hopwood. At number 3, I went with Don Retief. At number 2, I went with Dwayne Vermeulen. And in top spot, it has to be Henny Miller. Henny Miller, I think, is the greatest Springbok number 8 of all time, one of the greatest Springbok captains of all time. And again, like I mentioned with HO, he really revolutionized the way that a number 8 played the game. He had immense speed, which number 8s weren't renowned for. You know, they were more, you know, big, solid, physical guys that would secure the ball in the tight loose. But Henny Miller could run like a wing, and he used the base of the scrum as an attacking platform to really transform the way that the Springboks played. And on that 1951-52 tour, he really showed the world how good he was. So for me, Henny Miller, still the greatest number 8 that the Springboks has ever seen or ever produced. So the rest of the shortlist actually doesn't make any sort of difference. So you can debate me about Morné du Plessis and Gary Teichmann. They wouldn't have beat Henny Miller in any case, in my opinion. So that's number 8. The flankers was just as difficult because South Africa produces so many good flanks year after year that I probably could have picked a shortlist of 50, which was really tough to pick. But some guys who didn't make my shortlist include Thien Stoffberg, Burger Geldenhuys, Corné Krige, Francois Pienaar, Heinrich Bressou, Joe van der Kerk, and Johan Erasmus. Because in my top 10, in 10th position, I went with Jean Smith. At number 9, I picked Francois Lowe. At number 8, I picked Rob Lowe. At number 7, I went with Skalk Burger. At number 6, I picked Martin Pelser. At number 5, I went with Piet Greiling. At number 4, I picked André Venter. At number 3, I picked Peter Steph de Toy. At number 2, and I had to make amends for a mistake that I made in an earlier video, I included Ruben Creer at number 6. Ruben for me was just such an awesome rugby player. Again, he could do everything. You know, he had a complete skill set. If you go and look at his at some of the videos that we did on Ruben, and the highlights that we show, he could run with the ball. He had good distribution skills. He wasn't just a guy that played on the ground or played in the tight loose. He could mingle it with the back line, but he was tough as nails. I still believe that he scored a try in the '95 World Cup final, and he's one of my favorite Springboks of all time. So I had to pick Ruben at 6, and next to him on the other flank I picked Jan Ellis. And Jan Ellis sort of fits the mold of that long, tall, ball carrying number 7, which I think in tandem with Ruben Krier would be a very, very good fantasy combination. So there's a couple of guys like Andre Venter, Peter Steph du Toit that maybe could have fit in that spot, but Jan Ellis again, such a Springbok legend, fantastic runner with the ball, tough as nails, could tackle well, played 38 tests, which at the time was a record back in his day. So together with Piet Greiling, they made a phenomenal combination, and probably I could have picked Piet Greiling in the next to Jan Ellis, but I went with Jan Ellis and Ruben Krier, and I think that is a pretty solid combination on the flank. So yeah, those are my flankers. Looking at locks, there's not a lot of guys that I could add to the shortlist, but some names that popped up were Avril Milan, Loot de Jager teen Stoffberg. My top 10, I went with Kreine Otto in the 10th position. At number 9, I picked Johan Klaassen. At number 8, Mona van Heerden. At number 7, I picked Louis Moelman. At number 6, I went with Dani Rousseau. At number 5, I picked Eben Etzebeth. At number 4, I went with Mark Andrews. In third spot, I've got Bakkies Botha. In second spot, I've got Freda Priya, who I would pick at number 4. It was very difficult for me to pick between Frick and Bakkies, but like a couple of guys that I mentioned in this video already, Frick was such an all-round Springbok legend. He was named Player of the Century for the previous century in South African rugby. There's no way that I couldn't have picked him. A fantastic, dynamic ball carrier. He was known that he could drop place and score. Before John Hills thought he could kick a ball, Frick did it, like in the 60s and 70s. So I had to pick Frick, legend of the game. I was lucky enough to meet him last year, which was a bucket list item for me. So I don't even think that played a part. I just think Frick is one of the top 5 Springboks of all time. So there's no way that he wouldn't have made this list. And next to him, I picked Victor Matfield, who I think is the best Springbok lock that we've ever had. So Victor again gets criticized because he tended to play a little bit loose. The thing with him is he brought a skill set that most locks didn't have. Very much like a John Eales, who had a sort of a different dimension that he brought to the game. So Victor could chip and chase. He could pass the ball. Think about that try that Joe van Niekerk scored in 2004 against the Wallabies at Kings Park. Long pass from Victor that created that try. So yes, he did play loose, but he had the skill set to do it, right? And I think it fitted his game, and it sort of complemented Bakkies' tighter game that he played next to Victor. So from set piece, Victor was dominant. He picked off opposition ball like it was nothing. Very, very good in the lineouts, and all-round Springbok legend. So that for me is a pretty good combination. Going with Freda Priya and Victor Matfield, I'm quite happy with that combo. Okay, going into the front row. Some of the names that didn't make the shortlist, which deserve a mention, include Flippy van der Merwe, Frank Mellish, Guthrie Steenkamp, Henning van Aswegen, Jannie du Plessis, and Oki Geffen. My top 10 in 10th position, I went with Kobus Visagie. At number 9, I went with Hempies de Toy. At number 8, I picked Phil Mostert. At number 7, I went with Hannes Maree. At number 6, I picked the Beast, Tendai Mtawarira. At number 5, I went with Chris Koch. At number 4, I picked Mof Meiberg. At number 3, I picked Jaap Becker. And at number 2, and the guy that I would pick on the tight end side of this pack is Peter Toy, the grandfather of Peter Steph du Toit. He was strong as an ox. He wasn't a big guy. He didn't have the build of a Jaap Becker or a Mof Meiberg or a Kobus Visagie. Was a lot smaller, but he was immensely strong, being a farmer of trade. So his exploits on the field are legendary. He didn't have the longest Springbok career, but dominated in the scrums, never stood back for anybody. And I think, the strength that he brings to the pack is sort of what you need at tight end to really cement that scrum and provide a good platform for the rest of the team to play off. So I'm going with Peter Toy on the tight head side, and on the loose head side, I think is another no-brainer. I went with Os Dirant. Os is the greatest prop probably that the world has ever seen in my eyes. Like a lot of players that I mentioned, he brings a different dimension to the game. Os could run, he could pass. His support play was decent. He scored a couple of tries for South Africa, which props don't tend to do. But he was solid in the scrum and at set piece. He did the job that a prop had to do first and foremost, but he brought another element, and defensively, he was so good. So I think that's a pretty solid set of props. So I'm going with Peter Toy at tight head, Os Dirant on the loose head side, and finishing up the side at hooker. Some names that missed out on my shortlist include Jan Lotz, AB Milan, Adrian Strauss, James Dalton, and Tian Skreer. My top 5 and 5th position, I picked Malcolm Marx. At number 4, I picked John Smith. At number 3, I went with Gijs Spitzer. At number 2, I picked Bismarck du Plessis. And in top spot, I picked one of my childhood heroes, Uli Schmidt. And as good as Bismarck and Gijs Spitzer and these guys were, I don't think they were as good as Uli. I would have loved Uli, to have played more for South Africa and played more tests. He was just a wonderful player. Not as big as some of these other guys. Again, like a Peter Toy, he was smaller in size, but immensely strong and immensely fit. He ran the comrades a couple of times as well. And if you look at some of the highlights, go and check out the tribute that we did on Uli. A lot of the times, the last line of defense, he would just run over them to score a try. So he wasn't nimble or just nimble and could run, like a back. He had a lot of power for a small guy, where he didn't stand back for anybody. He was very aggressive in the tight loose. Before yellow cards, he spent a lot of times behind the poles in the sin bin, which I sort of loved because it brought a bit of grunt to his game. But I loved Uli. I think he's the greatest hooker that South Africa's ever produced, and I would have loved to see him in this team. So that's it, guys. From 1 to 15, that is my ultimate Springbok Dream 15. Leave your comments in the comment section below. Before I close off, I just want to take this opportunity to tell you about our new Patreon page. If you like what Real Rugby does and you want to give us a little bit of support and get access to more footage and more videos which we don't show on YouTube, go and check out our Patreon page. It's in the link in the description. So if you want to support us, I'd really appreciate that. If not, continue to stay subscribed on YouTube, like us on Facebook, like us on Instagram, and stay tuned for more videos. Cheers.